The metal bench at Union Square Station was cold against my back as the last evening train disappeared into the Manhattan tunnels, its red taillights vanishing like the last thread of trust I had in my own family. 67 years old, and here I was, sitting like forgotten luggage, abandoned not by a stranger, but by someone who had sworn to call me Mom. My name is Evelyn Carter, though most people just call me Eve, and I never imagined I'd end up stranded at a deserted New York platform. My only company, the flicker of overhead bulbs and the biting wind carrying the smell of rain. The one who left me here was my son's wife, my daughter-in-law, Madison Green. Just hours earlier, she'd been eating roast chicken at my table, smiling with her perfectly practiced grin, pretending to care about family while secretly plotting to test how far she could push me. She thought I was just an old woman with a modest pension, weak and dependent, someone she could manipulate into surrendering what little I had. But Madison had no idea who she'd just underestimated. What she saw was a grandmother with gray hair tucked under a wool cap and a cardigan too thin for the November chill. What she didn't see was the decades of choices, sacrifices, and power I had built quietly while raising my family, or the reserves of strength that came from surviving betrayals far harsher than hers. The night air pressed against me, heavy with that bitter taste of betrayal that never leaves your tongue once you've swallowed it too many times. I pulled my cardigan tight, lifted my eyes toward the skyscrapers that pierced the sky, and thought back to how just a simple Sunday dinner with my son Daniel had twisted into this moment of cruel abandonment. Dinner had started warmly enough. Daniel had invited me over, as he sometimes did since his father's passing 3 years ago, and I'd taken the 6 train downtown, clutching a bouquet of carnations from my little Bronx garden and a peach cobbler I'd baked that morning, the cinnamon still clinging to my hands. My son met me at the door, that same boyish smile I cherished since he was 5 years old, lighting up his face, though I noticed instantly how gaunt he looked now, his cheeks hollow, his energy dim. "Mom, you look amazing," he said, and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot my worries. But then Madison appeared from the kitchen, tall and sharp-edged, her presence filling the room with the kind of energy that makes you instinctively brace yourself. She carried herself with a practiced confidence, but her eyes flicked over me with calculation rather than warmth, like she was assessing inventory at a store. "Evelyn, so nice of you to come," she said, though her tone was lined with something cold. Their apartment had once been filled with expensive furniture, things Madison had bragged about endlessly when they first moved in, but I noticed several pieces missing now. The Italian leather sectional had been swapped for a thrift store couch, and the art Daniel had loved was gone, replaced by blank walls. Over dinner, conversation grew tense. Madison complained about bills, about how groceries were bleeding them dry, and mocked Daniel's freelance graphic design work as a hobby that doesn't pay. Daniel shrank with each jab, pushing his food around instead of defending himself. "It's just temporary," he murmured when Madison sneered about moving into a cheaper place. "Once I finish lining up new contracts, things will improve." But Madison only laughed, that humorless sound that stung more than silence. "Contracts? Please, that's money we don't have, Daniel. Maybe it's time you stop chasing fantasies." I felt my chest tighten. My son had been brilliant from the start. He graduated magna cum laude, full of talent and drive. But life with Madison had dulled his shine. I leaned in gently. Daniel's projects have always had real potential. It takes time, but I know he'll find his stride again. Madison's smile was thin, rehearsed, her voice dropping an octave into that condescending tone. "Easy to say when you're not the one paying rent, Evelyn." I didn't bother to remind her that I'd been quietly helping them for months. Anonymous deposits to keep the lights on, grocery gift cards left in Daniel's mailbox, even a check tucked into a birthday card. Madison's pride never allowed open help, yet she had no problem belittling my son while enjoying the invisible lifeline I provided. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to brew coffee, leaving me alone with her. She leaned back, folding her arms, studying me like prey. "You know, Evelyn, Daniel worries about you living all alone in that tiny Bronx apartment," she said casually, though her eyes glittered with something sharper. "Have you thought about what happens when you're, well, really old?" I kept my face neutral, but my instincts sharpened instantly. "I manage fine. Sure, for now. But Social Security doesn't stretch far. Daniel and I have been talking about the future, about your support system. You'll need resources, and family takes care of family." Her lips curled into something that looked like a smile, but felt more like a threat. It hit me then. This wasn't concern. This was an inventory check. She was already counting my assets, deciding how to fold them into her plans. "Independence is a luxury," she added smoothly, "and luxuries cost money." Daniel returned then, and just like that, her mask snapped back into place. Attentive wife, doting partner, all sweetness and compliments, but I had already seen behind it. Later, as the evening wrapped up, I mentioned catching the 9:15 back to the Bronx. Daniel offered to walk me to the station, but Madison waved him off. "Nonsense," she said, already jingling her car keys. "What kind of daughter-in-law would I be if I let her take the subway this late?" I hugged Daniel goodbye, noticing the way he held me a little longer than usual, his voice low in my ear. "Love you, Mom." And there was something in his tone that made me ache, like a child silently asking for help. The drive started with small talk, Madison chatting about traffic, the weather, pretending to be considerate. But as we neared Union Square, her words sharpened again. "You know, Evelyn, Daniel already has so much on his shoulders. Worrying about your future is a stress he doesn't need. If you made some arrangements now, signed a few papers, maybe added us as beneficiaries, it would take such a weight off." I stayed calm, though the audacity made my stomach turn. "Arrangements?" I asked. "Nothing big, just making things easier. Maybe give us power of attorney, combined accounts so Daniel can manage them. After all, family shares responsibilities." We pulled into a dark corner of the lot by the freight entrance, nowhere near the main drop-off. She turned to face me fully, her smile now openly predatory. "I know you have some savings, maybe $60,000, enough to help with bills, cover Daniel's expenses, and ensure you're safe with us as you age. It would be a win-win." I almost laughed at how badly she underestimated me. She thought I was worth only what she could see on the surface: a modest apartment, a careful wardrobe, a bus pass. She had no idea I was worth far more, that I had spent decades building a fortune behind closed doors. But I didn't show my hand. "I'll think about it," I said softly. She patted my purse like she already owned it. "No rush, just don't wait too long." Then she handed me my bag, stepped out, and drove off, her taillights vanishing around the corner. I walked to the schedule board, and my heart sunk. The last train had left 45 minutes earlier. Madison knew it. Of course she had. She had timed it perfectly. Leave the old woman stranded at night, cold, vulnerable, alone, so maybe next time she'd be more willing to accept help. I sat down on that freezing bench, clutching my purse, feeling that sharp sting of betrayal I knew all too well. She thought she had made her point, that she had shown me how powerless I was. But what Madison Green didn't understand is that I had been underestimated before, dismissed and discarded by people who thought they knew my worth, and every single one of them had lived to regret it. The night pressed heavier around me as I sat there at Union Square Station, the cold seeping into my bones, my cardigan doing little to keep away the November bite, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of vulnerability. Not because I lacked resources, I had plenty, but because my own daughter-in-law had deliberately left me stranded in the middle of Manhattan like I was disposable, and that wound cut deeper than the chill. My purse sat in my lap, my fingers gripping the worn leather, but I realized with a stab of panic that my cell phone was still on my kitchen counter back in the Bronx, where I'd left it in my rush to grab the flowers and cobbler. Madison had planned this to perfection, orchestrated every step of the evening to drive her point home. I was old, fragile, dependent, and needed her and Daniel to manage me. But what she didn't know was that I'd lived a lifetime being underestimated, quietly building strength while others assumed I had none. As the platform lights hummed overhead and the city roared faintly in the distance, I scanned my surroundings. No cabs lined the street, no late-night travelers hurried by, no safety net appeared. Then, as though fate hadn't entirely abandoned me, a flashlight beam cut through the gloom. A security guard, no more than 25, walked toward me, his uniform slightly loose on his lanky frame, but his expression kind. "Evening, ma'am," he said, lowering his light when he saw my face. "Last train's gone. You waiting on somebody?" I could have lied, said yes, pretended someone was on the way, but instead I answered carefully. "My daughter-in-law was supposed to take me home, but I think she got mixed up with the schedule." His eyebrows furrowed with concern. "That's rough. Do you have anyone you can call?" I held up my purse, embarrassed. "Left my phone at home." Without hesitation, he handed me his. "Here, use mine." The simple kindness of a stranger nearly undid me. "That's very kind, but there's no one I could call at this hour. My son's across town without a car, and I don't want to alarm him." He frowned, clearly uneasy with leaving me there. "Well, there's a diner about 6 blocks away, Murphy's, open all night. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. My shift ends at midnight. I can walk you over." I considered it, grateful, but before I could respond, another voice rang out. "Murphy's? Not for her." A woman in a custodial uniform approached, maybe in her late 50s, hair tied back in a ponytail streaked with gray, keys jangling at her hip. Her eyes assessed me quickly, shrewd, but not unkind. "Too many drunks at Murphy's this time of night. She needs somewhere safe." She extended her hand. "I'm Gloria Ramirez. I clean offices in this district. There's a break room in the Whitman building with a couch and a coffee pot. You can rest there until morning. Warm, safe, and I'll be there all night." I hesitated, but her steady gaze reassured me. "That's very generous. Are you sure it's no trouble?" Gloria's laugh was warm. "Honey, I've got 2 sons and 3 grandkids. If one of them was stranded, I'd pray someone would do the same." I glanced at the young guard, who gave me a small nod, then stood and followed Gloria across the quiet street toward a cluster of office buildings. Inside, the Whitman lobby was modest but clean, the hum of fluorescent lights oddly comforting after the eerie silence of the station. "Been cleaning these buildings 12 years, she said, leading me upstairs. "Never had trouble. You'll be fine." The break room was small with a kitchenette, a round table, and a couch that looked like it had supported many tired backs. Gloria started a pot of coffee, then sat across from me, curiosity in her eyes. "So, what's the real story? Because I've been around long enough to know when somebody's been abandoned, not just forgotten." Her bluntness surprised me, but it was refreshing after hours of Madison's manipulative politeness. I exhaled. "My daughter-in-law offered to drive me to the station knowing the last train was gone. I believe she wanted to prove a point, that I'm vulnerable, that I need them to manage my affairs." Gloria's mouth tightened. "That's not just cruelty, that's control. What's she after?" "Money," I said quietly. "She's been pressing me to sign over accounts, power of attorney, even hinted I should move in with them so we can pool resources. Tonight was her way of demonstrating how helpless I am." Gloria let out a low whistle. "Sounds like she's grooming you, making you question your independence so she can swoop in. Seen it before. My cousin went through something similar with her daughter. Started small, let us handle your bills, and before she knew it, the daughter had drained her accounts." She slid a steaming mug toward me. "So, what are you going to do about it?" I wrapped my hands around the warmth. staring into the coffee's dark surface. Madison thinks I'm a helpless old woman with maybe 50 grand in savings. She has no idea what she's really dealing with. Gloria arched her brow. She's wrong then? Very wrong, I said, a thin smile curling my lips for the first time that night. And she's about to find out. Gloria leaned back, her grin fierce. Good, because women like her don't stop until somebody makes them. We sat in companionable silence after that, sipping coffee, the distant hum of the city fading into background noise. I found myself sharing pieces of my past. Raising Daniel after my husband died young, working days as a bookkeeper while studying real estate at night, slowly building something solid while everyone assumed I was barely scraping by. I didn't tell her everything, not about the hidden business holdings, the investments, the trust accounts, but enough that she understood Madison's assumptions were dangerous. Around 2 a.m, Gloria pulled a blanket from her supply cart and draped it over me. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. And she did, sitting upright with a paperback in her lap while I drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. At dawn, she brewed fresh coffee, then offered me a ride in her dented Corolla to catch the early train. On the drive, I made a decision that shifted the ground beneath us both. Gloria, I said, how would you feel about a new job? Something that pays well with benefits and requires someone who understands loyalty and people. She glanced at me, startled. I don't know a thing about business. But you know character. You know truth when you see it. That's rarer than any degree. I handed her one of my real business cards, embossed with the logo of Carter Holdings, the empire I'd built from nothing, hidden beneath modest appearances. She gasped, wait, you're that Carter? The one who owns half of Midtown's commercial blocks? Yes. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed. And your daughter-in-law tried to con you out of your money? Lord, she's in for a surprise. I smiled grimly. Yes, she is. But I'll need help managing what comes next. Gloria tucked the card into her pocket like it was made of gold. Then you've got it. As the train pulled into the station, she asked the question I already knew would define the coming weeks. So, what exactly are you going to do about Madison? I stepped onto the platform, the morning sunlight spilling across the rails, and answered with quiet certainty. I'm going to give her exactly what she asked for. Proof of how family takes care of family, but it won't be the lesson she expects. By the time I stepped off that early train back in the Bronx, the city just beginning to stir with garbage trucks rumbling and shopkeepers lifting metal gates, my mind was already racing with strategy. Because Madison's little performance the night before had done more than strand me. It had stripped away any illusion that she might care about Daniel or me beyond what she could take from us. And that realization lit a fire I hadn't felt in decades. I boiled water for tea in my modest apartment, the same place Madison had mocked as too small for someone your age, and I sat at my kitchen table with pen and paper, drawing up a plan. First, I called my attorney, James Whitaker, who had been with me since the early days of Carter Holdings, when I was buying rundown duplexes with borrowed money and sweat equity. Evelyn, what's wrong? He asked, after hearing the steel in my voice. I explained, without drama, but with precision, how Madison had tried to coerce me into signing over power of attorney, how she'd abandoned me at Union Square knowing there was no last train, how she framed it all as family responsibility. James went silent, then said, "That's elder financial abuse, plain and simple. We could press charges." I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. Not yet. My son still believes in her. Criminal charges would crush him. I need something quieter but stronger. A way to protect my assets, shield Daniel, and expose Madison when the time is right. James sighed. Then we'll restructure. Trusts that bypass her completely. Emergency funds Daniel can access without her knowing it. Documents that guarantee your wealth can't be touched by anyone but you. And, James, I added, lowering my voice, I want you to start drafting papers that ensure if something happens to me, Daniel inherits through channels Madison can't touch. Lock her out entirely. His approval was audible, already on it. My next call was to Maria Delgado, a private investigator I'd used years ago in business deals when partners needed vetting. Maria, I said, I need a complete background check on Madison Green. Employment, finances, past relationships, debts, even parking tickets. And it has to be done without her or Danielle knowing it. Maria whistled low. This sounds personal. It is, I said flatly. She tried to break my family. I want every weakness she's got. I hung up, then phoned Janet at First State Bank, who had managed my accounts discreetly for over 15 years. Janet, I need anonymous giving channels set up again, I told her. Utility assistance for struggling families, rent support, grocery funds, same as before, but this time double it. And I want an emergency account ready to cover Daniel if he leaves Madison suddenly. It has to be structured so he has full access without her even knowing it exists. Janice paused, then said carefully, Evelyn, has she been stealing from him? Worse, I said. She's been stealing from his spirit. As the kettle hissed behind me, I remembered Daniel's face at dinner, how he'd shrunk when Madison belittled him, how his voice carried the defeat of a man constantly told he wasn't enough. Madison's poison wasn't just financial, it was emotional, and she was killing him slowly with it. That afternoon, Gloria came by my apartment, curious and cautious about this new job I'd mentioned. I showed her the structure of Carter Holdings. Not everything, but enough for her to see the breadth of what I controlled. Her eyes widened at the spreadsheets, the real estate maps, and the investment portfolios. And Madison thinks you're broke? She said incredulously. She's targeting a helpless grandmother. She's targeting the wrong one, I replied. And I need someone like you to help me manage this. Someone who doesn't play games, who sees people for what they are. Gloria leaned back, arms folded. So, what's the plan? I took a deep breath. Madison believes she's positioned to take over my finances. What she doesn't realize is that I've been quietly funding Daniel and her for months. The electric bill that got paid mysteriously, that was me. The grocery gift cards that showed up, me. She's already been depending on me without knowing it. I'm going to cut the lifeline and let her reveal her desperation. Then, when she pushes Daniel past his breaking point, I'll have the evidence and the resources ready to free him completely. Gloria's smile was sharp. You're going to starve her out. Exactly. But that night, as I sat sipping tea, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel that nearly broke me. Mom, Madison said you were upset last night. She told me you insisted on taking the train and refused her ride. She feels awful that you misunderstood her. She really cares about you. Please don't be too hard on her. I closed my eyes, fury boiling in my veins. Madison had twisted the story so completely that she'd painted herself as the thoughtful daughter-in-law rejected by a stubborn old woman. Daniel believed her. Of course he did. Because love makes fools of the best of us. I typed back, I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry, we'll talk soon. But as I set down the phone, I felt something harden inside me. Madison Green had made the mistake of thinking she was playing chess against a frail grandmother, when in truth she was moving pawns against a queen. And by the time I was finished, she would learn exactly how dangerous it is to underestimate a mother protecting her child. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The Bronx sun cutting through my curtains like a spotlight on the stage Madison had unwittingly dragged me onto. And as I brewed my coffee, the plan crystallized further. If she wanted to play manipulation games, then I would let her believe she was winning, all while pulling the floor out from under her feet. I spent the early hours reviewing old documents, wills, deeds, trust agreements, reminding myself that every asset I owned was already insulated in ways Madison couldn't begin to imagine. And then I called James, my attorney, to push the timeline faster. "We'll set up a living trust in Daniel's name only," he suggested, "but with protections that keep Madison from ever touching it. If they divorce, she can't claim a cent. If something happens to you, she's locked out. Period." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "And prepare emergency protections for me personally, restraining orders, guardianship clauses, so if Madison tries anything bolder, she'll run into a wall of legal consequences." James cleared his throat. "You're building a fortress, Evelyn. That's good. But are you prepared for what happens when Daniel sees her clearly? It'll hurt him." My heart twisted because I knew it would, but the alternative was watching my son waste away under her control. "Better a clean wound that heals than a slow poison that kills," I said firmly. After that call, Maria Delgado checked in with preliminary findings. Madison was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed, a personal loan she hadn't told Daniel about, and a shopping addiction masked as business expenses. Worse, Maria found she'd intercepted some of Daniel's mail, rerouting important bank documents to a P.O. box registered in her name. My chest burned as the truth became clear. Madison had not only been manipulating Daniel emotionally, she was already bleeding him financially, quietly tying nooses of debt around his neck while keeping him in the dark. That evening, Gloria came by again, notebook in hand, ready to learn. I watched her face as she read Maria's notes. "This is abuse," she said flatly. "Financial, emotional, psychological. She's isolating him." "Exactly," I replied, "and he still thinks she's saving him." Gloria leaned forward. "So what's next?" "I let her hang herself with her own rope," I said. "She's already desperate. The moment she realizes I won't bend easily, she'll escalate. That's when Daniel will see her clearly." 2 days later, the escalation arrived. Daniel called me, voice strained. "Mom, Madison thinks it's time we plan for the future. She says we should all sit down and talk about combining resources, maybe even moving in together. She wants to make sure you're safe." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Madison's script had not changed, just become bolder. "That's thoughtful," I said lightly. "Tell her I'd be glad to meet for lunch. Saturday." And so it was set. Madison wanted another chance to corner me, this time in a public place where she thought my resistance would be weaker. She didn't know I'd already decided to play along, to give her just enough rope. Friday evening, Maria dropped off a folder thicker than a phone book, Madison's full dossier. Inside were not only her debts and manipulations, but evidence of affairs with 2 different men, one of them a co-worker at her firm. She had been skimming money from Daniel's accounts to pay for weekend trips, hiding receipts by labeling them as business retreats. There were screenshots of her private messages, sneering about Daniel's pathetic dreams and mocking him for still needing mommy's help. My hands trembled as I read, not from shock, but from the righteous fury of a mother watching her child be degraded. Gloria looked over the documents with a scowl. "She's a parasite. You going to show Daniel?" "Not yet. He's not ready. He still loves her. First, I need him to see her manipulation with his own eyes. Then the rest will follow." Saturday arrived crisp and bright, the kind of fall day where Central Park glows gold and amber, and I dressed with deliberate modesty, a plain navy dress, a wool coat, pearls that looked heirloom rather than expensive. Madison needed to believe I was exactly who she thought I was, an elderly woman with limited means, nervous and pliable. At the restaurant, she was already seated, Daniel beside her hand draped possessively over his like a chain. "Evelyn," she cooed, rising to kiss my cheek. "I'm so glad we could do this after that little misunderstanding the other night." "So am I replied, sliding into the seat across from them. And then it began, the performance, the talk of family, of pooling resources, of protecting each other. Madison spoke with faux concern about Daniel's stress, about my future needs, about how sharing responsibilities would make everything easier. Then, with perfectly timed sweetness, she leaned forward and said, "You probably have some savings, Evelyn. Maybe 50, 60,000. If we combine that with ours, we could pay off debts, fund Daniel's projects, and guarantee you're cared for." I sipped my water, hiding my smile. 50,000, her guess at my life savings, when in reality, that sum was less than a week's investment income for me. She thought she was stealing my whole life. She had no idea she was stealing pennies from a vault. "That's a lot to think about," I said mildly. "Of course," she purred. "No pressure, but family supports family." Daniel looked torn, his eyes pleading with me to consider, clearly convinced Madison was sincere. I reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and gave him a look that said more than words. Patience, trust, timing. Then I turned back to Madison. "I'll need some time," I said. Her smile widened, triumphant, certain she'd won. But what she didn't realize was that in that moment, she had revealed every card in her hand, every calculation in her mind, and I had them all recorded, courtesy of the device tucked in my purse. By the time lunch ended, Madison believed she was steps from victory. What she didn't know was that she had just walked herself into the opening act of her downfall. I left that lunch with Madison practically glowing in her false triumph. Her hand looped through Daniel's arm as if she had already secured the prize, and while she whispered sweet nothings in his ear about how good it felt to be one strong family, I walked away with my pulse steady, because I knew the game had shifted. She believed I was close to surrender, but in reality, she had given me everything I needed to dismantle her carefully spun web. Back in my apartment, I set the recorder on the table and replayed her words. Her casual mention of 50 or 60,000, her insistence on pooling resources, her sharp little threats disguised as care, and I felt both disgust and grim satisfaction. James, my attorney, came over that evening, listened with a furrowed brow, and nodded. "This is attempted coercion, Evelyn. If you wanted, we could walk this into the DA's office right now and have her under investigation." I shook my head. "Not yet. Daniel's not ready. He still sees her as his partner. He needs to see her true self with his own eyes." James leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Then you need to prepare for escalation. She'll push harder now that she thinks you're wavering." "Good," I said. "Let her." The next day, Maria delivered the rest of the dossier. She'd uncovered something even darker. Madison had taken out a life insurance application with Daniel listed as the insured and herself as sole beneficiary. The signature was forged. My heart froze as I held the paper, realizing she wasn't just after me. She was positioning herself to profit from my son's death. "Accident insurance, filed last week," Maria explained grimly. "If approved, she'd have motive. A car crash, a slip on the subway tracks, even a staged mugging. It's all possible." My blood turned cold, then hot with fury. "She's not going to touch him," I whispered, clutching the folder. Gloria, who'd come by to help organize files, looked at me sharply. "This isn't just greed. This is predatory. She's dangerous." I nodded, rage solidifying into resolve. Then we moved faster. That night, Daniel called, his voice softer than usual, hesitant. "Mom, Madison says she feels terrible about pushing you. She wants to take you to lunch next week, just the two of you, to clear the air." My fingers curled tightly around the phone. Another setup, another attempt to isolate me, to push her agenda in a setting where she thought she could control the narrative. "Tell her I'd love that," I replied sweetly. My voice sugar, while inside me steel hardened. When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out the window at the lights of the city. Madison thought she was playing with a pawn, but she had no idea she had just invited the queen back onto the board. Over the following days, Gloria and I worked like a two-woman intelligence unit. She reached out to her ex-husband, a retired investigator, who still had contacts in insurance and city administration. Within 48 hours, he confirmed that Madison had attempted similar schemes before. Small ones, credit card frauds against relatives, a suspicious guardianship arrangement with an elderly aunt that had mysteriously collapsed when questions were raised. This wasn't new behavior, it was a pattern. Meanwhile, James finalized the emergency trust for Daniel, locking Madison out completely. And Maria began documenting every shred of evidence: intercepted mail, false applications, hidden debts, manipulation tactics, the entire poisonous tree of Madison's strategy. By midweek, I had a binder on my kitchen table, so thick it looked like a novel, each page a nail in her coffin. And yet, as powerful as the evidence was, I knew the hardest part was still ahead: Daniel's heart. He still loved her, still defended her, still wanted to believe the best. My son, my beautiful boy, was blind to the truth because she had convinced him he was nothing without her. I would need to open his eyes, carefully, gently, with timing so precise it couldn't be denied. One evening, as I was reviewing documents, Daniel called again, this time with a crack in his voice. "Mom, my card got declined at the grocery store today. Madison said it's just a bank error, but then I found a notice about a loan I never knew we had. Do you think something's wrong?" My throat tightened. He was starting to see. "Sweetheart, you need to go to the bank tomorrow. Get statements for every account in your name. Don't tell Madison, just do it." He hesitated, torn, afraid. "She'll be furious if I don't trust her." "Daniel," I said, using his full name, the way I had when he was a boy who needed to pay attention. "You don't need permission to see your own accounts. Go." He went quiet, then whispered, "Okay." After I hung up, I closed my eyes and let the tears come, because the battle for my son's freedom had officially begun. And though I knew it would break him to see Madison for what she really was, it was the only way to save him. Madison thought she was closing in on her victory, but what she didn't know was that every move she made was tightening the trap I had already set. Soon, very soon, the mask would slip, and when it did, Daniel would finally see the predator who had been sharing his bed all along. The next morning, my phone rang earlier than usual, and when I saw Daniel's name flashing across the screen, my heart clenched, because I knew this call could mark the turning point. His voice was tight, on the edge of breaking, as he said, "Mom, I went to the bank like you told me, and I don't know how to explain this, but 3 of our accounts have been closed without my knowledge, and the only one still open has $43 in it. 43, Mom. And when I asked Madison, she said it was just temporary, that she moved the money to investments, but she couldn't show me a single document, not an account number, not a statement, nothing." I listened in silence as he tried to rationalize, his voice trembling between disbelief and desperate hope, until finally he whispered, "I think she's lying to me, but I don't understand why." My chest ached, but I forced calm into my tone. "Daniel, she's not just lying. She's been stealing from you, and she's been trying to set her claws into me, too. What you're feeling now, that sick, twisting doubt, that's her mask slipping." He went quiet, then exhaled sharply, a sound of both anger and grief. "She told me this morning that you had agreed to give us money, that you were finally ready to join forces with us. Is that true?" My pulse surged, and I realized Madison had twisted our lunch conversation, painting me as the generous but reluctant old woman who had finally bent under her persuasion. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "I never agreed to anything. She's lying to you, just like she's been lying about the money." He cursed under his breath, the kind of sharp word he rarely used, and in that moment, I knew something inside him had cracked. "Mom, what do I do?" I closed my eyes, choosing my words carefully, because the truth was heavier than he knew. You need to see more, Daniel, before you can act. I have information, documents, evidence that show exactly what Madison has been doing, but you need to be ready to face it. And once you do, there's no going back. He swallowed audibly on the line. I need to know, Mom. I can't keep pretending. My heart ached for the boy who used to run home with paint on his hands and big dreams in his eyes, now broken down by the woman who was supposed to love him. Then come tomorrow, I said gently. We'll sit down and I'll show you everything. After we hung up, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, the weight of the battle pressing down on me, because I knew the next 24 hours could either save my son or destroy him. That afternoon, Gloria arrived with updates from Maria, and the news was worse than I'd feared. Madison had filed a fraudulent life insurance application not only on Daniel, but on me as well. Her forged signature, clumsy but effective enough that it had slipped through initial processing. My stomach lurched as I pictured Madison rehearsing her crocodile tears, collecting payouts while painting herself as the grieving widow and dutiful daughter-in-law. This is attempted murder by paperwork, Gloria said flatly, her face pale with anger. You need to move now. I nodded, fury crystallizing into ice. We will. I called James, relayed the insurance scheme, and within hours, he was on the phone with state regulators and the district attorney's office. This is beyond financial abuse, he said grimly. She's setting up motives for homicide. We'll need law enforcement involved. Meanwhile, Maria had tracked down a woman named Patricia, who had once been engaged to Madison's brother. Patricia revealed that Madison had a history, 2 bankruptcies under different names, multiple credit scams, and at least one elderly neighbor she had swindled out of savings under the guise of helping with bills. The pattern was undeniable. Madison was a predator, skilled at cloaking her greed under a smile. By evening, Daniel texted me again. She's furious, Mom. Says I betrayed her by going to the bank. She stormed out and hasn't come back yet. What if she hurts me? My blood ran cold. I replied immediately. Pack a bag, tonight. Gloria will meet you. Don't wait. We set the plan in motion with precision. Gloria picked him up near his apartment under the pretense of a casual errand, drove him straight to a safe location I owned under a shell company, and within an hour, Daniel was resting in a furnished loft across town, finally free of Madison's immediate reach. When I saw him walk in, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with hurt, I wanted to crush him into my arms and never let go. Instead, I handed him the binder of evidence, my fingers trembling slightly as I said, "Read. All of it. Then you'll understand." He opened the first page, and as his eyes scanned the records, bank statements showing money siphoned off, credit cards in his name with charges he'd never made, messages where Madison mocked him to her lovers, I watched the disbelief drain from his face, replaced by horror, then rage, then a bone-deep sorrow that made my chest ache. She was going to ruin me, he whispered. She already has, I corrected softly, but now you see her clearly. He slammed the binder shut, his hands shaking, his jaw clenched. What do we do, Mom? I met his eyes, and in them I saw not just the boy I had raised, but the man who had finally awakened from a nightmare. We end her game, Daniel, on our terms, and when it's done, she'll never hurt you or anyone else again. In the quiet that followed Daniel's shock, the city hummed on. Buses sighed, coffee shops opened, lives continued. But for me, every second crackled with purpose because the moment had arrived to turn the pile of paper in my hands into action. Maria Delgado had finished her most delicate work and handed me a dossier that read like a criminal biography, forged signatures, redirected paychecks, GPS logs showing Madison's nightly drives to a P.O. box, receipts for pricey weekend getaways charged to accounts in Daniel's name, and a copy of that life insurance application with the clumsy forgery that proved her intention was no longer only greed, but potentially lethal. I called James first, and his voice on the line was low and efficient. We'll get emergency restraining orders, freeze any accounts she touches, and notify the DA about the insurance application immediately. Then I called Janet at First State Bank and instructed her to place immediate holds on any transfers associated with Madison and to flag every account for forensic review. Janet took orders without question, her professional tone threaded with the kind of discreet urgency I'd cultivated in banking circles for years. Next came Maria's recommendation to involve law enforcement quietly. There was no point in tipping off a predator who already knew how to manipulate social sympathy, so I contacted Detective Carmen Ortiz at the Financial Crimes Unit, someone Marcus had worked with in the past. Carmen listened once, then said, "We move fast. We set a trap, and we make the arrest when she reaches for the money or the policy. We'll need absolute corroboration, paper trail, bank freezes, cameras if necessary." The plan formed like a machine. Step 1, secure Daniel and his assets. Step 2, gather irrefutable evidence and have it authenticated by the bank and our forensic accountant. Step 3, engineer a situation where Madison would try to cash in, expose herself, or access accounts so the police could legally arrest her in flagrante delicto. Step 4, ensure Patricia Chen and any other victims were ready to testify to establish pattern and motive. Over the next 48 hours, everything moved with terrible, beautiful precision. James executed the trust and emergency guardianship clauses, so Daniel's access bypassed Madison entirely. Janet supplied documented transaction histories and immediate freeze notices. Maria dug deeper and found emails where Madison discussed finalizing the paperwork and a voicemail where she told a friend she'd get it done next week when the timing was right. I met with Detective Ortiz in a small conference room at the precinct where she explained the legal choreography. They would need a provable attempt to commit fraud or theft, or ideally find her in possession of funds or forged documents, because otherwise a manipulative woman could spin an elegant tale of misunderstanding and ruin the case in the court of public opinion. We arranged for Elena, whom Maria had tracked down and who'd been a quiet, brave whistleblower in Madison's past schemes, to fly in and be ready to corroborate a prior pattern of similar behavior. Patricia Chen agreed to record her testimony via secure video link in case she was too far to testify live immediately. Meanwhile, Gloria became my boots on the ground. She started quietly tracking Madison's movements, noting the shop receipts, the late-night rides to the P.O. box, and reporting back to Maria. She also maintained a presence near Daniel's apartment to ensure Madison couldn't manipulate him into doing anything rash. Daniel, still fragile but steadier each hour, met with James to understand his options. James set up a direct line for him to access funds we'd allocated that he could use without Madison's knowledge: money to secure housing, to replace identity documents if necessary, and to start the process of financial recovery. The entire network felt like a small army, each person a necessary instrument in the work of undoing a predator who had thought herself clever. As we tightened the net, Madison's behavior escalated predictably. She began texting Daniel frantic, then seductive, then cruel, claiming she had done everything for their family, that she needed his trust, that he was being selfish by doubting her. She posted curated photos showing smiles and staged fun, but Maria's surveillance logs showed a different picture: frantic transfers, late-night calls to an unknown number, and copies of the forged application being printed at a library where she'd made an account under a pseudonym. The arrogance of her pattern was almost comedic. She had assumed the same playbook would work again, never imagining we'd use her moves against her. Detective Ortiz asked for a date to act, and I gave her a noon window the following Thursday, the day Madison had said she would finalize some helpful paperwork at a branch under the guise of setting up joint accounts properly. We didn't want to arrest her in front of Daniel. We wanted the evidence and the law to close the circle cleanly. The plan was to have the bank staff, pre-briefed and ready, cut off her access, to have Detective Ortiz and her unit there waiting to observe and, if needed, take custody, and to have Maria on site with authenticated copies of the forged docs. In the quiet hours before noon, I met with Daniel again and sat with him when he finally allowed himself to feel every ugly thing I'd been protecting him from: the humiliation, the betrayal, the grief for time lost to a person who had never loved him, only used him. He paced, then stopped and looked at me with the new resolve in his face, one I hadn't seen since he was a teenager launching into the world. "I want her arrested," he said simply. "I want her gone." I squeezed his hand, proud and broken simultaneously. "Then let's let the law do its work."
The morning arrived cold and bright, and Madison remained blissfully ignorant. She had, like all predators, convinced of their invulnerability, kept a schedule, believing repetition would yield success. She walked into the bank with her head high, documents in hand, carefully prepared, forged signatures she thought were clever. And James and Detective Ortiz were already in the lobby watching through the camera feed. The moment she presented the paperwork and asked the teller to process a transfer, the bank manager, who'd been pre-briefed and had verified each document against our forensic copies, announced they had grounds to decline the transaction and that law enforcement needed to speak with her before any further action could be taken. The shift in Madison's face from confident to pale was instantaneous and deliciously revealing. This is when charm curdles and all the rehearsed empathy falls away. She tried to weave a story about family difficulties and misunderstandings, but Detective Ortiz asked a simple question about the signature's authenticity, and a forensic analyst confirmed the forgery with a note of clinical finality. Maria stepped forward with evidence of her previous scams. Elena connected similar patterns, and Patricia, whose voice was steady on a recorded line, explained how Madison had preyed on her and others. The bank manager placed her under temporary hold while the detectives explained the charges. Panic bloomed in her posture. She reached, as predators often do, for the narrative of victimhood, but the weight of paperwork, video logs, witness statements, and the bank's own flag transactions made the story collapse like a house of cards. The arrest itself was swift and procedural. No melodrama, just the sober clink of handcuffs, the reading of rights. Madison's protest turned into thin, frantic sounds as Detective Ortiz led her away. Outside, a small crowd gathered, some curious onlookers, a few who'd seen similar schemes, and watched with a mix of vindication and sorrow. Daniel watched from a distance, flanked by Gloria and James, his face a study in relief and grief. And for the first time in months, he looked like himself again, wary but free. The news of the arrest moved faster than I anticipated. A reporter from a local paper called, then another, and the story began to spread in the way these things do. Sensational, yet necessary. But I had learned long ago that justice is a marathon disguised as a sprint. Arrest is only the beginning. We still had to secure convictions, to make prosecutors understand the breadth of her deception, and to ensure the restitution for the many women she'd hurt. For that, we needed more than one arrest. We needed a public record of the pattern, and that's why Patricia's testimony, Elena's documents, Janet's forensic accounting, and Maria's tracker logs were indispensable. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, I reflected on the strange arithmetic power. Madison thought she was stealing currency. Instead, she stole my son's time, his confidence, and in doing so, she had sparked a response that would not only reclaim what she'd taken, but transform it into something life-giving. Funds for recovery, scholarships, supports for victims, because that is what you do when you fight. You turn the violence into protection for others. In the dawn after the arrest, I watched Daniel sleep for the first time without the tension that had hollowed his face, and I felt the quiet, steady knowledge that the most important move had been made. There was more work ahead, trials and testimony, and the messy, slow mechanics of justice. But the predator was caged, and for now, the city's mourning felt less dangerous. We had won the first necessary battle, and the rest, as I always told myself in nights of doubt and mornings of resolution, would be about turning victory into prevention, so no other son, no other daughter would have to rebuild from someone else's ruin.
The days after Madison's arrest moved like thunderclouds. Dark, heavy, charged with the kind of electricity that makes your skin prickle. Because even though she sat in a jail cell, the fallout of her schemes rippled outward in ways I knew would take months, maybe years to untangle. Yet I also felt something else stirring in me. The steel certainty that we had crossed the final threshold and that neither Daniel nor I would ever again be under her thumb. Prosecutors move fast, thanks to the airtight evidence Detective Ortiz and Maria compiled. Bank records, forged documents, the insurance application with Daniel's fake signature, testimony from Patricia and Elena, even Gloria's logs of Madison's late-night trips to that P.O. box.
Every piece fit neatly into a mosaic of fraud, coercion, and attempted financial exploitation so complete that her defense attorney blanched when the charges were read. Identity theft, attempted elder abuse, forgery, fraud, and reckless endangerment tied to the insurance schemes. Daniel sat beside me in the courthouse during her arraignment, his shoulders stiff, but his chin lifted higher than I'd seen in years. And when Madison was let in wearing that county orange jumpsuit, her hair disheveled, eyes darting, I saw him exhale, like a man who had been holding his breath for years and finally let it go. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on me, and for the briefest moment, her mask cracked. Gone was the sweet daughter-in-law. Gone was the poised manipulator. In her eyes was only raw hatred, the kind that confirmed every instinct I'd trusted. I held her stare without flinching, letting her see the woman she had thought powerless, standing firm, unshaken, the one she had underestimated into orchestrating her downfall. The months that followed were grueling but transformative. Daniel, guided by James and supported by Gloria, began the painstaking work of reclaiming his identity, canceling fraudulent cards, restoring his credit, securing his accounts. Each step was painful, a reminder of how deeply she had entangled him, but with every form signed and every record corrected, I saw strength return to his posture, like a man slowly stepping out of chains. Meanwhile, I poured resources into something bigger, something Madison could never touch. I expanded Carter Holdings' philanthropic arm, channeling funds into a new foundation dedicated to helping men and women escape financial abuse. Daniel named it himself, the Quiet Strength Fund. And though I insisted it wasn't necessary, he said it was his way of honoring what he now understood I had always carried: silent power disguised as modesty, protection built behind walls of humility. Gloria became its first director, her sharp instincts and plain-spoken honesty making her the perfect advocate. And together, we launched programs to cover emergency housing, legal representation, and financial literacy workshops. Survivors began coming forward, neighbors, coworkers, strangers, each with their own story of manipulation and theft, each grateful to discover they weren't alone. As for Madison, her trial came swiftly, and the verdict was a relief so pure it felt like sunlight after endless rain. Guilty on all major counts, sentenced to 2 decades in state prison with restitution ordered to Daniel and others she had defrauded. She tried to smirk when the sentence was read, tried to muster that false confidence she had wielded like a blade, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. She was led away in shackles, and for the first time, I felt no anger, only closure. Daniel didn't cheer or curse. He simply whispered, "It's over," and squeezed my hands so tight my fingers ached. Afterward, we stood outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. And when one asked me how it felt to destroy my own daughter-in-law, I replied simply, "I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. I just refused to let her take my son with her." The words spread in headlines, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that Daniel was free. In the years that followed, he flourished, returning to his design work with a vigor I hadn't seen since college days, eventually opening a small but thriving studio. He remarried later, cautiously but wisely, to a woman who saw his worth without needing to diminish it, and when they had a daughter, he named her Evelyn, after me. Sometimes late at night, I sit by my window with a cup of tea and think back to that cold bench at Union Square, the moment I realized Madison was willing to leave me stranded in the dark just to make me feel powerless. And I marvel at the irony. Her cruelty had been the spark that reignited my fire, the mistake that exposed her schemes and freed my son. People like Madison believe appearances tell the whole story, that modest clothes and an old cardigan mean weakness, that age means dependency. But they forget what decades of survival and sacrifice can build. My cardigan may still be thin, my apartment still modest, my demeanor still quiet. But behind it all stands an empire of resources and a fortress of resolution. Madison thought she was playing with an old woman's savings. What she really did was awaken a mother's war chest. And in the end, that was the lesson she carried to prison. Never mistake quiet for powerless. Never mistake age for fragility. And never, ever underestimate a woman protecting her child.